Hello and welcome back to Essential Cocktails. So this is a 50 video course where I'm going to be giving you all of the tips, tricks, tools and techniques you might need to make better drinks, all in 50 days. And what we're going to talk about today is the essential tools for making cocktails. And this is a massively inappropriate title because that actually goes as far as to say that none of these tools are 100% essential and can pretty much always be subbed out for something you might already have in your house, at least until it starts to hold you back. So custom designed cocktail tools are quite expensive, particularly if you want to buy the best ones. But until then, use what you have. Don't let this be a barrier to entry. Don't feel you have to spend any money because we just want to get started. All right, so what we want to do before we even start thinking about making cocktails is to prepare our ice. And to do this, you're going to want some ice trays, ideally, some ice molds. I like to have a smaller size and a bigger size, but don't go too small because you want plenty of surface area when you're shaking the cocktail. Get this in the freezer well in advance and make sure you have plenty of ice because you don't want to scrimp on ice when it's an ingredient in pretty much every cold cocktail. You can also buy bags of ice, but I actually prefer to make my own, A, because it's more economical, and B, because it's more consistent and you can control exactly the size of the ice you make. Once we've got plenty of ice in the freezer, we can start thinking about laying our bar. And none of this is really essential, but I do like to set a nice mise en place, or having all my things in place ready to go, so it's an efficient process and an enjoyable process when I make drinks. So first of all, I like to have a bar mat, but again, completely unessential. It just makes things a little bit cleaner and a little bit easier to clean up afterwards. One thing that I would say actually is essential, but I would imagine everyone has, is to have a tea towel to hand so you can clean up any spills and wipe around and do some kind of cleaning as you go, which is really important. I'd recommend having a chopping board and knife in place so you can chop your ingredients, your fruit, your citruses, your garnishes. But again, this is something I'd expect everyone has in their house. And then something that perhaps you don't have, but I really strongly recommend buying actually as a first purchase, would be a really good set of scales. Not a very expensive set of scales necessarily, but just something that's reliable that can measure to 0.1 of a gram. And this just means we can be very precise with our measurements. If your scales just go to a gram, that's totally fine for making syrups, making a lot of ingredients. But because we're going to be actually seasoning our drinks, which we'll talk about in a future episode, you do have to have quite a delicate touch, and a little bit too much can actually spoil a drink. So if you're going to make one investment, I recommend a good set of scales that measure to 0.1 of a gram. So in scenario one, let's say you're making a shaken cocktail. The first thing you're going to need is something to shake the drink in, and that is going to be imperative, but it doesn't have to be a professional bar tool. So my preferred option, if you can, is to use a tin-on-tin Boston shaker, where you have a bigger tin, a smaller tin, they seal together, and you shake the drink in here. And the reason for this is twofold. Number one, it tends to have a much better seal, so you're not going to get any kind of leakages or spillages or any accidents, hopefully. But also number two, this should last you a lifetime. There's no reason for this to break. You should have that really nice seal, you shake it all together, and this, particularly with the tin on tin, is incredibly robust. You can buy these where you get a glass that goes onto a tin. Still great results, but I just find tin on tin is so robust. They just kind of fit together really nicely because they both slightly adapt to each other to get a really nice seal. And if you can, go for one of these. Another option you have is a kind of three-piece shaker, which is something like this, where you have the base tin, you have the kind of built-in strainer, so you can strain the cocktail through these holes, which is really useful, and then a lid. Similar fundamentals, you're going to shake the cocktail, but if you see the difference here, the tin-on-tin, or the Boston shaker style, has much more headroom, so you're going to get more motion as you shake the drink up and down, more motion in the ocean, so you get a little bit more kind of texture. This one is a little bit smaller. If you're serving a smaller drink, really kind of works well. Some people prefer this. Whichever one you have, just use it, pick your poison. They're both going to do a great job, but I do prefer this just slightly in terms of texture. But if you have neither of these, don't worry about it. Use a Kilner jar or a jam jar or even some kind of sealed container at home. So this works surprisingly well. You just build the drink in here, shake the whole thing up. The only limiting factor of this in particular is it's quite short, so you don't get that headroom to get really nice texture, but still a really good starting point. So now I've chosen our tin, and I'm going to go with this one. You can move these to one side. We want to think about what's going to go in here. So if you're going to add some fruit in here, first of all, you're going to need your chopping board and knife to cut it. And then if you're going to crush the fruit or some herbs into the drink, you can use one of these, which is called a muddler. If you don't have this, not a problem at all. You can use a rolling pin, which works really well. And all this is doing is just pressing the fruit or herbs just to release the flavor into the drink. So a really important tool to have, but it doesn't have to be a specific cocktail tool. In your cocktail, you're probably going to want to add some kind of citrus or some kind of fruit juice. And in order to do so, you might want one of these, which are called Mexican elbows. But if you don't have these, which are custom designed for squeezing limes and lemons and oranges, again, completely fine. Use your hands, use what you have, squeeze the juice in there. You can perhaps use your other hand as a sieve to catch the pips, but chances are we're going to strain the drink anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But don't get too hung up on juices. You can use the hand pressed ones. As long as you get the juice from the fruit, that's the most important thing. Next up, you might want to add some liquid to your drink in the form of a spirit, a juice, a syrup, whatever that might be. And you want to accurately measure this to make sure you can make the same drink over and over again. And if it's not quite right, you know exactly how to fine tune it next time. So I do recommend measuring, and jiggers come in all sorts of forms. You've got this style, which is my preferred style. And the reason I really like this is it has lines inside each section, which are bands, to give you an idea of exactly how much you add into the drink. So this particular model has 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 mils on this side. And on the other side, we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. In the States, you might find a 1 and 2 ounce version of this with bands to kind of measure the increments in between. But jiggers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. These are really popular, which I also like because they're straight-sided, but then you have to kind of eyeball within them because they don't have the interior bands. So 25 and 50 mil. These might be 1 and 2 ounce. So 1 ounce is 30 mils, 2 ounces is 60 mils. So bear that in mind for the conversions. And even if you don't have either of these, that's totally fine. Move them to one side. Grab something you have which is of similar size to a jigger, something like an egg cup or a shot glass. And to measure exactly how much this holds, all you need to do is put it on a scale, tear the scale to 0, fill it up with water, weigh how much water goes in there in grams. And because 1 gram of water is equivalent to 1 mil of water, however much it holds in grams, that's how many mils it holds. So you can use this to then have an idea of exactly how much you add into the drink in a way to control exactly your ratios and proportions. So really, really kind of easy to use. It might not be exactly a convenient number, which does make it a little bit more difficult. But again, I don't want any of this to hold you back. Use what you have to get great results. Something I can't stress enough is to taste, taste, taste. And if you've made a cocktail in a tin, you're not 100% sure it's going to be perfect. You can just grab a straw, dip it in the drink, put your finger on the end, have a little taste, check you're happy with the balance. If you do this before you add the ice and before you shake the drink, obviously it's going to be a little bit more intense, so you do have to kind of allow for a little bit of variation when you get the final drink. But this will give you a really good understanding of primarily the balance of the drink to make sure you're happy with what you're about to shake up. Obviously don't double dip your straws, so make sure that goes in the wash after use, but I do recommend using reusable straws. Definitely don't use plastic for this because it's incredibly wasteful. Next up, you're going to want to give this a really good shake with lots of ice. And now you've got your cold drink ready to go. You want to serve this in a glass. So the professional tools to do this would be a Hawthorne strainer and a fine strainer to catch all the little shards of ice and any kind of fruit that makes it through. But if you don't have these, that's completely fine again. Hawthorne strainers come in all different shapes and sizes. But if you've got a nice tightly coiled spring, that's a really good sign to not let too much through. And with a fine strainer, substitute this out. You can use something like this, just a sieve. You can use a tea strainer. And in place of your Hawthorne strainer, you can just pour it through your Kilner jar, just closing the lid slightly to kind of catch the main bulk of the ice through your sieve, and you get really good results. Another thing you can do if you really must, which I don't really recommend, but it does just about get the job done, is put the smaller tin on the bigger tin, just to catch the main bit of ice. But this does let a lot through and it's very difficult to control. So this is your plan Z if you're going to do that, but at a pinch, it will do a decent job. If you're making a stirred drink, you might want something like this, which is a mixing glass. But if you don't have a professional mixing glass, that's also completely fine. You can use the bigger tin from your Boston shaker. You can even use a pint glass. Anything that's big enough to hold the liquid will work pretty well. And you're going to want to stir it with a spoon. So professional bar spoons look like this, which have your kind of round neck, I guess, or something like this. But if you don't have these, that's completely fine. You can actually get really good results just by using a chopstick, and this will get you pretty similar results. The benefit of having a longer spoon is that you can reach all the way to the bottom of the ice and you can get the whole thing moving rather than just the top part of the drink. So ideally a bar spoon will be great, but if you don't have that, go with a chopstick. You want to strain your drink into a glass, which I recommend keeping in the freezer. And if you were to have 3 glasses, I'd recommend a kind of short water glass, a taller highball glass, and some kind of coupe or martini glass. But again, whichever glass you have will work perfectly well. Just bear in mind you don't want these glasses to be too big, either because they'll look really empty when you add the cocktail, or you'll need to multiply your recipe up, which might get you quite drunk, which is not ideal. To prepare your garnishes, you might need something like a peeler, a grater, or a lighter. And then, with all that, and potentially a blender too, if you want to make some blended cocktails, you'll be really well set up to make the vast majority of cocktails. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can see the rest of the course where we start using these tools to make delicious drinks, and I'll see you in the next video.